Hi everyone, this is Dr. Fox, and welcome to the Orbit and Eye session. Let's first begin with a discussion of the bony orbit. In this video, we'll discuss the structure and relative location of the bony orbit with respect to surrounding structures. We'll hone in on the major foramina, fissures, and fossae associated with the orbit and what's transmitted through these structures. So let's start with the orbit itself. The orbit is pyramidal in shape. The base of the pyramid is the outer rim of the orbit, and there are going to be four structures that all converge posteromedially along the long axis of the orbit. The rim is relatively simple. There are three bones which comprise it. There are the frontal bone, the maxilla, and the zygomatic. And these are going to have periostea that will contribute to an orbital septum, which we'll discuss in a subsequent video. The orbit is home to the eye and the extraocular muscles, which largely move the globe of the eye about to affect gaze, and all of the neurovasculature which serves the eye. It also hosts the lacrimal gland, which is a supportive structure to the eye. In terms of its functions, it protects the eye and the lacrimal gland and all of the neurovasculature which supports it. There's a healthy amount of orbital adipose tissue which serves to insulate and keep these structures distinct and protected. The orbit also serves to anchor some of the attachments of the extraocular muscles, such that when they contract, the eye can be moved. With respect to other spaces, the orbit has relatively straightforward relationships. So here we're looking at a donor with a craniotomy. And so we're looking into the cranial cavity. The orbit itself is found inferior to the anterior cranial fossa, which we can see here. So the orbit is in this space. And it's also anterior to the middle cranial fossa. So there's a lost sense of depth here, but if you were to move anterior from that middle cranial fossa, you would encounter a wall of bone, in front of which would be the orbit. Surrounding spaces of bones may also contain or host paranasal sinuses. The paranasal sinuses are spaces or chambers within the bones that surround the nasal cavity. And so as the orbits are superior and lateral to the nasal cavity, they're going to enjoy relationships with these paranasal sinuses. So specifically, the orbits are going to be inferolateral to the frontal sinuses, lateral to the ethmoidal sinuses or air cells, and superior to the maxillary sinuses. The orbit is also going to be anterolateral to the Pterygopalatine fossa. So the Pterygopalatine fossa is a space which excites every anatomist. Contained within this space is the Pterygopalatine ganglion, which is the ganglion along the pathway for lacrimation, so serving the lacrimal gland. It also is going to host or transmit branches of V2, the maxillary nerve, as well as the maxillary artery. Now there are four surfaces of the orbit. There is a roof, a floor, a lateral wall, and a medial wall. So let's take a look at what comprises these surfaces and any of the features of these surfaces that are pertinent to our study of the orbit and eye. So the roof of the orbit consists largely of the frontal bone, which is more anterior, and the sphenoid, which is a little more posterior. Within the frontal bone, there's a shallow indentation in the superolateral aspect of the orbit called the lacrimal fossa. and that's where the lacrimal gland is going to reside. Within the sphenoid, there is a space called the optic canal, through which cranial nerve 2, or the optic nerve, travels and is accompanied by the ophthalmic artery, the major supply of blood to the eye and the orbital space. Keep in mind that the anterior cranial fossa is just superior to this area, and that's an area through which in lab we will have to dissect in order to access the orbit. It's also going to be superomedial to the frontal sinus. The lateral wall of the orbit consists of largely the zygomatic bone, as we can see here, and a little bit of the sphenoid as well. Now, the lateral wall of the orbit is separated from the roof of the orbit by the superior orbital fissure, as we can see here. That superior orbital fissure is going to be a major conduit for important neurovasculature. In particular, cranial nerve 3, the oculomotor nerve, cranial nerve 4, the trochlear nerve, V1, which is the ophthalmic nerve, or the ophthalmic division of the trigeminal nerve, cranial nerve 6, which is the abducens, as well as the superior ophthalmic vein, which is the major drainage of blood from the orbit. The floor of the orbit is relatively parsimonious, consisting partially of the zygomatic bone and mostly of the maxilla, keeping in mind that the maxillary sinuses are going to be inferior to the orbit. And then we have the medial wall, last but not least. So the medial wall consists from anterior to posterior, the maxilla, the lacrimal bone, the ethmoid, and a little bit of the sphenoid. So let's take a look at some of the features here. So there's a shallow indentation on the lacrimal bone called the nasolacrimal fossa, and part of this is shared with the ethmoid. And so that is part of the conductive pathway of tears. So there is a nasolacrimal duct which will conduct those tears from there to the inferior nasal concha. The ethmoid bone also hosts the ethmoidal air cells, which are going to be medial to the orbit. So we've discussed the bony orbit as well as its surfaces, their features, and the contents. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to talking to you in the next video.